Okay. So the first game, Morphy's black against Bird. She played him a lot, so I just chose this game because I thought it was interesting. And they played the Philidor defense, which is not very common because it's pretty bad for black. But F5 is an aggressive move, and Morphy played extremely aggressively. So this kind of fit his style, although it's +2-ish according to Stockfish. Basically, the idea is that if white takes on F5, then black gets to push their pawns forward, which might look kind of solid, but in reality is actually bad because black's king is extremely open now, and because they have overextended their pieces, their pawns, I mean. So this is just defeats the purpose. So there's actually not really a purpose to this opening. I don't know why you would play this, but I guess that's why people don't play it anymore. And this game kind of shows that too. So white just develops. Here, Morphy played d5, which is trying to keep the tempo of the game, keep attacking. But black is extremely underdeveloped. Black has 0 pieces developed and white has 2 pieces, which means that black is behind in development. And if black doesn't develop soon, then white's probably going to open up the center and checkmate black, because that's what happens, which is why it's crucial to usually keep your pawns close to your king and develop your pieces in castle and then decide how you're going to attack. Here, black doesn't even have an f-pawn anymore, let alone their pieces aren't developed. So a better alternative would have been knight f6. Try to get the pieces out and castled. And then a possible continuation would be bishop g5, black develops, and then trading to get this nice position. Black's bishop on e7 looks really bad. It's not really doing much because all the pawns are on the black squares and blocking it. The idea of bishop g5 was so that we can take on f6 with the bishop, because now we have a nice knight on e4, and the bishop wasn't doing much, so that was better than just taking on f6 now. But yeah, that's still better for white here. White has a more secure king and better piece placement, ahead of development, all of that. But Morphy didn't do this, so Morphy tried to keep being aggressive, which kind of worked because white played knight g3 here, which seems like a logical move, but it's better to keep bringing your pieces forward, because once you start bringing your pieces back, that's kind of how you get stomped over by your opponent, because they start attacking you and you start going back, and then things just end badly. So there's some other options here, like knight takes e5. And then there's this really messy position, which is a result of black's overextension of their pawns. Yeah, white and white's just better. Black's pieces, bishop on c8, knight on b8, rook on a8, not looking really good. Black's king being on h6 is extremely scary. So this is just one way white could have proceeded. I don't really know why white didn't do that. I don't think they probably didn't want to sack the knight, but oftentimes sacking pieces when your opponent's king is in the center and they're not anywhere near castling and getting their king safe, then sacrificing pieces works usually. If you have a continuous flow of an attack that can lead to winning other material. But white didn't have to sack anything either. They could have played knight g5. Make the knight more active than it was on g3. There's also, we're attacking the f7 square now and e6. So black would probably play e4 because they don't want to lose the e5 pawn. They also do not want to take on d4 because, I mean, the knight will take it back probably on d4, and e6 is even weaker. Just going to be a bad series of events. So e4 would probably be likely. kind of black's idea in this position anyway. But white just brings their pieces. F7 is extremely weak. So we have to play knight h6 to protect f7. But you never want to bring your knights on the edge of the board either because they don't do much there. There's not many options of where it can go. Not attacking many squares. Knights are better on f6. So, and then here there's actually a nice tactic. So white immediately basically wins because of the tactic. So they take, and then this is just completely winning for white. I mean, the queen is coming to h5. Black's king is in the middle of the board. And yeah, white's down a piece, but they're more developed, more safe with the king. They have a pawn for the piece. Yeah, it's just winning for white. I mean, obviously, white has to be careful, but oh wait, white's not even down a piece. My bad. White is up a pawn, just pure pawn, and yeah. So, and then well, the alternative is to take on h6 back, take the piece back, which this is kind of what happens when your king is in the middle of the board. Bishop b5 is actually a very interesting move, kind of prophylactic move, because the problem with why white cannot checkmate immediately is because after knight c4 check, the king escapes to c6. So bishop b5 protects the c6 square from the king. This is just an example. Yeah, Black's king just gets to the middle of the board and gets checkmated. Yeah, so anyways, returning. So that's kind of why knight g5 was a better option. Just trying to attack, pressuring black more, trying to punish them for not developing their pieces. But okay, knight g3, e4 again. So knight h5 it looks like a good move to pressure f6 because black is currently pinned. However, it's actually quite dubious. A better alternative was c4 to pressure the d5 pawn. If the d5 pawn falls, the e4 pawn falls, and black doesn't really have anything going for them after that. And then if black tries to play something like c6, then they just here black just has weird piece placement, and they're kind of tied down because knight f5 is coming. There's just the pin, well, two pins. Yeah, so it's just a very uncomfortable position for black. So that's kind of why c4 was a better option for white, just taking it slower, but still continuously pressing. And after knight h5, white castles, which is already better, much better for black. Before this, it was like +1, +2 even. But now black's king is safe. They're developed. White hasn't made that much progress. So I think it's slightly better for black now, even. So black now is when Morphy starts to transition the game from like being worse to just outplaying his opponent. So I think he does this in a really nice way. But g4 kind of helps black a lot. It would have been better just to, take on f6, move the bishop back, castle, and then start attacking. White was a bit optimistic because giving away the pawn doesn't really give them anything right now. White doesn't have any pieces really to follow up immediately. So that was just slight misjudgment on white's part. Okay, so now both players have castles, both players have kind of developed, and Morphy decides to do this very interesting sacrifice, which is virtually, it's not a good idea. It doesn't work. Like a better option would have just been to bring the bishop out, and then so the point of the point of bishop b4 is to force white to play c3 because the queen is otherwise trapped, and then you bring the bishop back. But c3 was important. It was important to make white move c3 because it kind of just blocks their pieces more, and now black can push a5, a4, a3, and then pressure b2 and pressure b3, and white currently is just really hard for white to make a move. They're just well blocked. The pawns are blocked. There's not really much going on. Black's a lot better here. They're just going to slowly advance on the queen side and probably checkmate. So rook f2 was a bit ambitious. The idea was to bring the queen over, which I think is an interesting idea. It's like a rook lift where you bring the rook over, but in this case, it's the queen. So it makes a lot of sense. It's just, it just doesn't entirely work. But I liked how Morphy proceeded anyway with it, I guess. Because white has to be extremely, so like when you're attacking, a lot of times you sacrifice pieces, even though sometimes it doesn't work. But if you continue attacking and you have a concrete plan and concrete moves, then a lot of times it ends up working anyways because your opponent will likely mess up if people under pressure for a long time end up a lot of times screwing up. So that's probably partly why Morphy went for this as well. But white did a pretty decent job of defending for the most part, except here with king b2. So it would have been better just to go back to c1 because, well, if white wants a draw. Yeah, well, okay, so b4, the move b4 was interesting because it looks a bit scary. But I think white was trying to trade queens because white is up material, so trading queens is beneficial for them. And it prevents, well, after trading queens, white is never going to get checkmated probably. So it is a bit risky, but it also takes off the pressure from b2. It does allow for perpetual, so black had the option to go for that, which they didn't. But white should have tried to go for it here anyways with king c1. After which black would probably play something like a5. The b pawn is blocking black from successfully mating white. So a5 is trying to get rid of the b pawn. And white can't really not do anything about it because if white doesn't do anything, black's just going to take on b4. So that's why black is already better here. They're down a rook, so most likely white will have to give up a piece or rook back to save themselves. But it would be a tough game. King b2 just loses immediately to a nice tactic. So Morphy sacrifices another piece, which this time works because white has to give up their queen. King c1 loses to a immediate checkmate. And yes, king c3 leads to queen b3 checkmate. So white doesn't have any other option except to give the queen. And if white didn't take back the bishop here, then it was essentially the same thing as what a5 did, was to get rid of the b pawn. So black successfully did that. Most likely, like bishop a5 or bishop anywhere, some sort of discovery would happen, and white would just lose, which is why they gave up the queen. And now, so we have two rooks and a bishop for a queen, which two rooks in general is better than a queen, but here they have a bishop as well. So it's not too bad. However, black immediately gets their pieces out with this nice idea. The bishop, so, because here, black wants to still checkmate because white's king is lacking safety. And if black does not do anything and just sits around, they will probably lose since the two rooks are stronger than the queen, especially having a bishop, because black's pawns aren't really they don't seem to be promoting anytime soon. So black needs to take action immediately. So they want to bring the bishop into the game in order to do this. And you can think about where the bishop needs to go. There's no room really for the bishop to go, since the C, D, and E pawns are all in white squares, just like the bishop. Not a good combination. So ideally, the bishop would be on F5 on an open diagonal. Since the pawn on E4 is blocking that diagonal, the move E3 was very interesting because it sacrifices a pawn, but it opens up the diagonal for piece activity. So that was a good idea. Yeah, and here it just kind of all falls apart because white has nowhere to go. White's just running into all sorts of mating traps. And yeah, so white just tries to give up the rook back. Because the idea is that if black takes it, then black doesn't have any pieces to mate anymore. So this would be probably fine for white. Two bishops and a rook is better than a queen, although black does have some pawns to make up for that. But I think white is probably okay here. But black did not do that. Morphy found the nice little trick now, because the rook on A1, H1 is hanging, and D3. So if bishop C1 would probably just take on D3, and then D4 falls, everything falls. Yeah, king D2, the rook on H1 is hanging. So white resigned here, which I think this game really shows how Morphy plays, because he would just be extremely aggressive and a lot of times sack pieces, whether it works or not. And it usually ended up working out in the long run, even if he was losing. I think it just shows that if you just continuously pressure your opponent and try to be active and get your pieces out and stuff, then good things will happen. So the next game is between the same two players. But this time Morphy is white. So we can see what kinds of things he played as white, which he played a gambit again. Kind of the same thing with the F5, but this time F4 because he's white, which is called the King's Gambit. And it's actually fairly popular even now. They kind of played. So usually black goes G5 here, trying to attack immediately. So one possible line is the following, which is it looks extremely crazy. I personally have never played this as white or as black, so I don't know this very well, but it's really hectic and both of the kings are unsafe. So I don't even know what's going on here, but black is technically slightly better. So this is not recommended for white, this opening in general, but what happened in the game was bishop e7, black decided not to overextend. They decided just to attack with their pieces. So here, the best move is king f1, followed by something like this. D5 is sacrificing a pawn, but just like we saw in the previous game, a lot of times you can sacrifice a pawn if that means that you can get your bishop out. Black wants to get their light square bishop out so they can aid in the attack, because without it, they don't really have much of an attack. D5 is also gets pieces out really quickly since it's attacking a bishop, so white can't just ignore it. So I would probably take, oops, sorry, don't know what happened there. Okay, yeah, and then so black doesn't want to take back on D5 because that will get white's pieces out more. The knight can probably take, and then the knight's attacking F4. So instead, black wants to bring their pieces, but they don't want to lose the H4 bishop since it's really important. So they just move it back, and they can just develop. Here, So we get to a position like this, theoretically speaking, which is slightly better for white. But I think black has a good amount of compensation because of the white king being really unsafe. That's a very common theme in a lot of these games, is the king being really unsafe. And king safety is one of the most important things, because you can be up pieces and have a very weak king, and you'll still lose probably if you get checkmated. So in this case, white is up 2 pawns, but they're not that much better even because of this king safety, because the king is inhibiting the rook from getting active and just from any other piece really doing much, because they always have to be constantly worrying about black's pieces coming and destroying white, especially with the bishops. Maybe potentially the other bishop can come to c5, have both bishops aiming on the king, then on g4, f2 is going to be weak. So yeah, that is partly the idea of d5, to kind of open things up, because white's king being in the center makes black want to open it so they can attack. But here white actually played g3. They wanted to keep the option to castle, but g3 is not very good, because black just takes it, and now we've opened the king even more, because now not only do we not have an f pawn, we don't have a g pawn anymore. But I assume Morphy did this intentionally. So he castled, and here black took another pawn. However, the d5 idea is still present and is still the best move, especially now because the bishop can come to h3 and actually do something. In the previous case, when the rook was on h1, bishop h3 didn't have that big of an effect. But now if white takes it with the pawn, for example, then we have bishop h3. White can try to bother black a little bit. And then we get something like this, where white's pieces are very they're a little bit suspicious. They're not doing as much as black's pieces. Black is likely going to bring other pieces into the attack. Knight f6, knight g4, maybe. Yeah, the two bishops are often they're super strong when together. They control a lot of squares. White has to be constantly looking out for various discoveries with the g pawn, and just with their king safety in general. Yeah, so that was an idea. Black's slightly better here. And then just for an example, if like white takes with the bishop, then black can just develop their pieces. Something like this, which is a very open position, and black is better because they have more pieces. They're up 2 pawns. So, and white's king is very unsafe again, so that's a huge thing. And then if, for example, we wanted to take on h2, maybe instead of playing king h1, then this would just be really bad. I mean, knight g4 probably, or knight takes d5 even. Yeah, I think just knight takes d5. The knight on h4 is hanging. White's king is even more open now, so to just be a bad idea. That's another common thing. A lot of times when you're under attack and they take like the h pawn or the a pawn, then instead of taking it back, a lot of times you will just sit in front of the pawn, because the pawn blocks activity for your opponent. So like it's kind of protecting you in a sense. So that's another important concept, I think. Okay, so black decided to take on h2, and Morphy didn't take back for same reasoning as before, just keep the king more protected. It's already extremely unprotected. And now Bird played d5. And here Morphy got a bit optimistic again with his sacrifices that don't really work. So he tried taking on f7. I think he was probably trying to not be under attack anymore, really, and just try to do something. I mean, he could have taken on an h4, for instance, and this would transpose to a position that we saw only a few moments ago, where black is slightly better. But still better than bishop takes f7, because he's just losing a piece here. Well, my bad. I can't count. He's not losing a piece, but he has... It's worse because it allows black to get their pieces out more. Because when the king is on f7, it allows the rook to come to e8 immediately, or to f8. Whereas if you just take on h4, then black has to make an extra effort to castle or move their king and then develop the rook. That's probably the idea. Yeah, so black is better here. Their king is not super safe. However, I think they're better because their pieces can come out faster and they are up a pawn, so that's helpful. So black's main goal right now is to get their king safe. But you don't want to play king g8 here because you don't want to block your rook. So you want to move your rook out first. For example, rook f8. Something like d4, because black was trying to get their pieces out. d4 allows the bishop to come out. Then you get king g8, and black's just better. The knight on h4 is not very good at all. It's not doing much. Probably have to come to f5, but like e4 is hanging. White kind of has just a lot of problems. They have to deal with their hanging pawns. In the meantime, black's bishop's probably going to come to h3 or g4 with tempo, and the other knight's going to come out. So it's just a lot better for black here. Black, however, decided to play rook e8, which surprisingly loses all of the advantage, because it gives white a bit more time to consolidate, and the rook just doesn't do anything on e8, or it is trying to do something, is trying to attack e4, but d3 protects e4, and now the rook isn't doing as much. The rook on f8 was better because it's on the open file, and rooks are pretty much always supposed to be on the open files because they can do more on open files than on semi-open files like this one. Because after bishop h3, Morphy decided to play queen h5 check. So he's not backing down. He's trying to be aggressive and get the initiative, and make use of this pin while his rook is still on the f file. So here black plays king g8, and now the only move for white not to be worse is to take on f6. So queen h5 was essentially sacrificing an exchange, but it was getting the initiative, so it was a strategic sacrifice, and therefore it wasn't really bad. Also here there's no alternative because the queen's under attack and the rook is under attack, and you can't save both of them. So of course we should save the queen. Yeah, now Morphy's getting his pieces out finally. Next the bishop will have to come out, and then we can bring the rook into action. So black played rook e5 here. I think he wanted to kick white's queen back, to not have to deal with the annoying queen. But a better option was just to be safe, bring the bishop back, because the bishop can come back to f7, and then black is really safe. For example, king takes h2, bishop f7. Yeah, and black is protecting everything. Probably he can play c6 next, rook g8 maybe. Start kicking back white's pieces, and black will be totally fine. because instead rook e5 falls into other issues. Yeah, for example, bishop f4, although it's not the best move in this position, it still is pretty decent because you're developing while attacking a piece, and the two go very well hand in hand. It allows you to develop faster. So that's what Morphy did. However, a better option was just to take the pawn back. Now that White's kind of gotten more pieces out, they can afford to take this pawn because they're not just going to get checkmated immediately, like we saw. Well, like it was potentially like before when White took on h2, they would more likely be able to get checkmated than here. So here's okay to take it. Something like this could happen. Queen taking on f6, so taking more pawns, and then something like this. And White's just a lot better. White is down material, technically speaking. However, because of the weak pawn, so the d6 is weak, and the bishop on g4 is looking a little suspicious because after something like bishop f4 and rook g1, then the bishop might have problems. After bishop f4, there's also problems with the d6 pawn. Yeah, the knight on d5 is looking good. The other knight's probably going to come into the f5 or something soon, and White will probably create a pass pawn using their pawn advantage. So White's doing actually completely fine here, despite being down material. But yeah, so Morphy played bishop f4, which looks reasonable. Knight c6 is a surprising move, handing back the rook. But the idea is that if you take the rook, I think you can just... I'm not entirely sure. Well, I think that taking the rook maybe is not the best idea because it allows black to bring in their knight. Or they can take with the pawn and bring in the rook through the f-file. Yeah, I think that black mainly did not want to save the rook because that would waste even more time that they do not really have. Black is the one who's underdeveloped now, so they really need to bring their pieces into the game. And even if that means sacrificing a rook, then that's the better option in this particular case. So white just took on h2, still keeping the option to take the rook because the bishop's currently under attack. So bishop g4, trying to attack the queen. And now rook g1. So rook g1 is a really good move. Rather than bringing the queen back, we're developing another piece and attacking at the same time and dealing with our queen being attacked. So it accomplishes many goals. And it's a pin on the king, so could potentially have some mating attacks. Here already, black's only move is rook g5. Protect the bishop. Something like queen e3. Something like this would happen. White's doing pretty good, I think, because f6 is weak. Just so many pieces are under attack. And the fact that black's rook is under attack by the bishop, so you can take it whenever you want, is also a good sign for white. Instead, black went h5, which maybe looks like the more logical option. It also protects the bishop, but it weakens the king, which was the main issue with it. So now we can take the rook back. If knight takes, we can take on f6. If white tries to not get checkmated, because black will probably get mated if they move their knight back. There's not really a good square to move it to. And then things like knight d5, e5, e6 maybe are coming, knight f5, knight h6, stuff like that. So black just can trade queens and not have to deal with that. And then this endgame is just losing for black because they're down a pawn. Not only are they down a pawn, but white has a protected pass pawn. So white has very high chances to win, and black's just having some issues with the rook and the king being under a pin. So that's good for white. Instead, black took with that pawn to not lose the pawn. White still brings the knight in. d5 is a really good square for the knight. Since it's in the center of the board, knights are great in the center because they can go to a lot of squares and attack a lot of things. It's also almost a four-post, which means that the knight there is protected by a pawn, and no pawns can attack it. In this case, the pawn can attack it, technically the c-pawn, but for that, black needs to move their knight first, so it's going to take a while. So yeah, that's just another reason why d5 is a great square for the knight. It's going to accomplish a lot. I mean, right now, knight f6 is being threatened to win the queen. Just a lot of things in general. So knight d4, trying to attack the queen. Maybe trying to kick out the knight via c6 if black gets the option to. So here, white doesn't want to take the queen because black could take white's queen. Queen trade is not what white's looking for here. Instead of queen e3, looking for checkmate. And here, white wins a pawn. Queen g7 was to prevent queen h6. Pretty much the only move in this position, but then hangs the pawn. Yeah, black tries to defend, but the king is way too weak, and black's rook is not helping. If black's rook was, on h6 or something, black would be maybe okay, but Morphy finishes off pretty nicely here. And then we get into an endgame. King and pawn endgame, white's up a pawn, so pretty much always a win if you're up a pawn. And I think Morphy had pretty good technique here. d4 is to create a pass pawn, because that's the only way we're going to be winning. And he just advances pawn. And then go and take the other pawns. So black ended up resigning here. I think overall a pretty solid game by Morphy. The opening choice was a little questionable again, in my opinion, like a lot of his openings. But I guess he just plays like that. He likes crazy positions and it works for him. So yeah, he made sure to get his king decently safe and then made his opponent's king weak. And that's, I think, what won him the game. So then the next game is against another serious player that he played a lot at the time. And just gonna look at one game. He's white again. Morphy's white. This time he did not advance his f pawn, so it's already kind of a good sign. Instead, he plays the Evans gambit. So a gambit again. The idea here is that, like in most gambits, is that when the opponent takes the pawn, then the person who sacked the pawn can get their pieces out pretty quickly. So, for example, c3 is kicking the bishop back, and now we have d4 immediately. I think this is technically the main line. Maybe not. I'm not sure, but it transposes basically to what happens in the game. The idea is to get something like this, because white has a very, very nice control over the center, and they're ahead of development, and the pieces are going to come out. Black's pieces, the bishop looks a little bit, well, it's not bad on b6, but it's not particularly great there either. So this looks pretty comfortable for white, despite being down a pawn. Here I think black could take on c3 if white chose this move order instead of d6. but this loses immediately to bishop f7. Yeah, and then white takes their piece back. It takes another pawn, and black's king is extremely wrecked right now. So this is just not good for black, which is why black doesn't take in, but just say something like d6. Yeah. Morphy decided to castle first, which black can't prevent d4 right now anyways, so it doesn't really matter that much. Transposes. And here, so black took on d4, which ends up happening as what we just looked at, but that's actually not the best idea. Better is just bishop b6, and then something like d5, de5, de5, and then this sort of endgame would happen. Completely playable. Both sides have equal chances. You know, anything can happen here. Yeah. If king takes the queen, then f7 is hanging. So, yeah. I think this is better than taking on d4 with the pawn, because in this case, there's no pawn on e5, so white has their own ideas of playing e5 later and opening everything up, because again, black is not castled, black's knight is not even developed, so since white is castled and white can get the rook to e1 and stuff, then d5, e5 immediately is likely going to be very good for white. And that's exactly what Morphy did. Already this just looks, you know, the knight having to go to e7 just looks kind of bad for black. Yeah. Morphy played e6 even, trying to disrupt the pawn structure near the king to make the king more weak. Yeah, here black finally castles, but white has a really nice position. I mean, the pawn on e6 is preventing the bishop from developing. It's giving ideas with the f7 square. Here, ideas are like f4, g4 are prevalent, and just white's slightly better because of that, even though they're down a pawn. So this is a case where the gambits are actually good, because if you're not losing immediately, then you get a lot of compensation, and then you have a good attacking chances, and you know, you can pressure your opponent. So yeah, so something like knight c3 here, and then moving the king out of the way, f4, g4, f5, just bringing the pieces would be good. Instead, Morphy played queen h5, trying to get immediately into the attack, I guess. But it's too rushed, and attacks aren't really going to work if you don't have pieces to back it up. So that's why something like knight c3 first is better, because then you have another piece that, like knight e4 or something, to back up your attack. But in this case, there's nothing really here, so simply h6 will get rid of the attack for the most part. Yeah, so Morphy makes another mistake here with bishop b2. Bishop b2 looks very logical. Pointing it to the king, pressure g7. Here there's bishop h6 immediately. Yeah, and white is really tied down to the point where bishop e6 is the best move here. Something like this. And, you know, black is attacking two pieces, so it's in a very uncomfortable position. Yeah, this is just really weird endgame, because white has 3 connected passed pawns. Yeah, there's just a lot of minor pieces. Probably anything can happen really here. But yeah, getting rid of the e6 pawn is crucial for black, because the e6 pawn helps aid white's attack a lot, because it's blocking a lot of black's pieces. So that's why something like bishop e6, even though it is sacrificing the piece back. It's better. I think if black does not do that, then things like knight e4 and knight f6 are just coming immediately. There might not be a way to stop that. Same with knight h6. Or like queen h6 and bring the knight to g5 and stuff like that. So, but yeah, anyway, white played bishop b2, which falls into d5. We want to get rid of the e6 pawn, so we don't really want to sack our pieces if we don't have to. So d5 is trying to get rid of defenders, trying to do something. So, for example, if bishop takes d5, queen b5, because the bishop is pinned due to the queen on h5, and so queen b5 attacks both d5 and b2. So in order to preserve the pieces, bishop g7, and then something crazy like this happens, and black's better. Black successfully got rid of the e6 pawn, got rid of a lot of white's attackers, got their pieces out, and has two pieces for a rook. And generally speaking, two pieces are better than a rook. Yeah, and black's more developed, so black's just better here. Kind of why d5 was important. Yeah, I think here. Yeah, here it looks like white was getting close to a checkmate, but I guess it just didn't quite work out. So, very specific move by move scenario, but yeah, so that might be partly why Morphy decided to take on g7 now, before black's queen got out. But taking on g7's not very good, because you can just take it back. If king takes, so knight g5 is to threaten checkmate. And then if we go, because queen h7 is threatened here, only way to prevent it is to move the rook away. So we have king f8, and this is a draw, which is maybe something black should have gone for, because I don't know if they will survive if they don't do that. Yeah, because like here, actually black is better here, so. The reason I thought that black had it go for the professional trick, I don't remember why, but or no, maybe that was bad. That was bad because white got the professional. Yeah, they just get their pieces out here at this point, and yeah, so black is trying to, black is getting their pieces really active. If we count the material, we have two pieces for rook again, so, and white's rooks aren't doing that great. The f1 rook is doing nothing, so black is a lot better here. And then we get this weird trade. And here, black is winning after rook b5. Yeah, a lot of things are under attack here. Both rooks are hanging for white, and black's rook is hanging. If black takes the rook back, then white can take here with check. So that's not ideal. So rook b5 is good because you're still attacking both of white's rooks, but you're also attacking white's bishop, and your rook is not under attack anymore, which is why it's winning, because you can't defend everything. Black ends up winning something back here, or something extra here. Instead, black thought that they could play rook g2, which doesn't work just because bishop f1 loses the bishop back. So by the end of this, black ends up even material, go up a pawn, but minor pieces wise is even. And this is just a draw because of all the equal material. However, like most endgames, you should usually play on to the very end because your opponents can make mistakes, as happened here. For example, knight e5 is already slightly inaccurate. Moving the knight pretty much anywhere else is fine. Here, c6 is actually... So the reason why this endgame is slightly better for black, because black can put their pawns on white squares, which means that nobody can attack them because white has a light squared bishop, white has a dark squared bishop, and black also has a dark squared bishop. So those pawns aren't inhibiting black, and they also cannot be attacked by white. And yeah, so f2 and h2 can be attacked. White can also try to place their pawns on white squares, but the difference is that those pawns can't protect each other. White has 3 islands, and black has 1. And more islands just means that more pawn islands means that it's a lot easier for your opponent to attack your pawns. So yeah, I don't think this is necessarily winning for black. I don't know. But it's definitely a lot easier to play as black. But black was just trying to play for a draw, I assume, by trying to trade everything. Bishop g3 was a better place to move white's bishop here. Yeah, because black can't move their pawn on the c pawn, and they can't move their bishop now either. So both are confined to staying where they are right now, which is very annoying for black. And if black tries to take on g3, then white just fixes their pawn structure. So, yeah, but that's why bishop g3 was a good option for white. White instead played bishop d4, which was really bad because now black can utilize the fact that they have a protected passed pawn and start pushing it. So yeah, they're just going to start pawn storming. And these pawns are much further ahead than white's passed pawns. They're also all protected by each other, which is very helpful. I think black is pretty much winning here. So here is important to push the c pawn. There's a saying in chess endgames that you always push the pawn. The first pawn that you push is the one that you're going to be promoting. In this case, the c pawn is probably going to be the one that's getting promoted because it's the only one that's actually a pass. Like, it can go and promote to a queen without any other pawn stopping it. So something like this would happen before b3. Yeah. In this case, white can't really do much because white's bishop is confined to 3 squares, or 2 squares, basically, b2 and c1. And the king is kind of stuck. If the king moves away, then there's always a3 and b2 and a2 ideas. And black's just going to come and take white's pawns and probably bring the king and most likely end up promoting. But instead, black ended up pushing the a pawn first. And yeah, in this case, because here we don't really want to push c4 anymore because after something like c4, there's king c3. And now, you know, if you play b4, then you're going to lose your c4 pawn. It's so much harder to advance the pawns now. So yeah, that's why here I played a3. I think trying to keep white's pawn on a2. But in reality, bringing the king was better. Bringing the king is like the most important thing to do in endgames. Black's king is very far away from the action, making it quite difficult to win right now. So just playing with king g6 and then king f5 would have been a lot better. Also to note that black does not want to take on h2 because this sort of trade is only beneficial for white. The c5 pawn is so much more. It can become much more problematic than the h pawn can become for white. Than the h pawn can become for black. So that's why this kind of trade is not good for black. Black wants to keep all 3 pawns because they're very, very strong. So black played a3. Yeah, and then here, something like f3, dancing around, and this would be a draw. I mean, nobody can really make progress here. And like most bishop endgames with even number of pawns, it's just drawn. However, endgames are really difficult, and I think this game just shows that, because even though these were some of the top players in the world at the time, they still had questionable endgame technique. For example, Morphy played king e4 here, which is just completely losing because of b4. And then something like this would happen. H2 is hanging now because the bishop's no longer attacking c5, so black can take it. Yes, and then bishop f4, very, very important move. So here you can see that black has advanced their pawns because they're still trying to promote. The bishop on c1 is not allowing black to further push their pawns successfully. So bishop f4, sacrificing the bishop because it moves the bishop away, and now we have b3. And if white does nothing, there's going to be b takes b2 and b1, or b takes a2 and a1, or something like this. And then if white doesn't want to take the bishop and like king c4, then something like this happens, and this is winning for black. And then bishop a3, we get the same position essentially. So yeah, bishop f4, very interesting idea. However, endgames are hard, so black did not find b4 and played c4 instead. And that's because king d4 is attacking c4. So black doesn't have b4 here anymore because c4 is hanging. So yeah, and then every time that black tries to move the bishop away now, like taking on h2 or something, then white has king c5 and is going to take all the pawns, which is why having the b5 c4 setup with the pawn on a3 is not a very good combination. The pawns aren't really protecting each other anymore, and they're sort of disrupted and leave holes for white's king to come into. White played f4 here, trying to be active, but that's not very good because of b4 being allowed now. That's why king d4 was crucial, trying to prevent b4. You know, if your opponent has passed pawns, you kind of want to prevent them from advancing as much as they can, because otherwise they'll advance too far and then it's too late to do anything about it. So yeah, that's why if this pawn, the f pawn is not going to be promoting anyways. I mean, black's king is right there, so yeah. King to the center, more important. So before, and then here, I think bishop a3 might be the only move. I mean, there's always b3 ideas coming. I don't know if bishop takes a3 was necessary here though, but we did that. And then got this endgame, which ends up being a draw. Because there's no way to make progress. The king's just going to go back and forth, a1, b1, and he can't really get the king out. We try to play bishop e5 or something, thinking that king a1 will allow king c2 mate. Then there's king c1. And because of this pawn on a2, I can't play king b3 and get their king in. So just no progress can be made. I think the computer technically shows that this is winning up until this point here, saying that bishop e5 is winning. However, I'm not entirely sure how, because, again, like, I don't know how black is supposed to get their king in. Black's just going to stand here and do nothing, which I think is interesting, because if there's no a2 pawn, then it's winning for black, because the a1 is a queening, is the correct color, is the color of the bishop. Yeah, this game ended in a draw. And so I guess that was why bishop a3 was played. Morphy might have assumed that this was a draw. So, yeah, I think this game was very good at showing that endgames are very, very important. And even top players screw up a lot in endgames. Even if you're worse, you know, you can always swindle your way to a win in the endgame. So, yeah, I thought it was a very interesting game.